this is going to be an interesting conversation because I am a born skeptic. So I will proceed in that manner. I'm also a member of this parish, but I'll proceed gingerly. But Mary Claire Kendall is here to defend her book, explain her book.
Is this a thesis?
No, it's a chance to present to a perhaps skeptical crowd. I think it's very important that we understand there's all truths in here. All the truths are true. And I was respectful of those. I would just say that people who read Hemingway, because we do love him, he really taught men how to write, taught men it was okay to write. He was a great adventurer as well as writer, and everywhere in the world that he went, I want to go. So I joined the Peace Corps. I said, I got to go to Africa, so that's where Hemingway went. I want to go to Paris. I can't go to Paris in the 20s, but I can go to Paris today and think about what it was like in the 20s and go to all the old saloons. And I wanted to go to Cuba for that reason. And I wanted to go to Key West. Everywhere Hemingway went, I want to go. So he was a trailblazer. I want to ask you about the main thrust of your book. And take all the time you want, Mary Claire.
Okay.
And that is the question, what was, for example, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, has a faith. He refers to his faith, but I think is politically wonderful because it doesn't separate him off into a Jewish category, but it includes everyone's faith. And I think that's a very well stated political position. And there's nothing wrong with politics. But in this case, you said he's a Catholic or a Christian. How defined are you about your argument in your book?
Well, okay. Usually people ask me, how did you come to write this book?
No,
So
I'm not one of those people.
That's good.
I really want you to tell, because I think there's something in here.
Yes.
And I think it's magical, because I do see the references in his writing, the fact that he's a Catholic burial, the fact that, well, he was married 4 times, that's not quite consistent. But the language of the sun also rises is from the Old Testament. Why did he choose that? There's interesting things. Why did he believe in apparitions, which he apparently did? Why did he believe that was truth, proof of the church's truthiness? He believed in all this. So I think there's a lot to it, so carry on.
I wanted to be an ambulance driver in World War I. Wanted to be where the action was. He was a national reporter, so he'd embed at the front forward listening post. He was delivering coffee seemingly, but was almost killed. But he had a bad the mortar shells and it carried a man to the dugout. He was blacked out. I mean, just heroic. And so in that period, he was a second lieutenant, and he got to know this priest from the Abruzzi region. My friend who's filming this is from Abruzzi, Father Giuseppe Bianchi. And he's like almost a mirror image of the priest in A Farewell to Arms. It's uncanny. So he was the priest who I believe, because Hemingway was so taken with apparitions, he befriended Hemingway, and I do believe that he would have talked to him about the recent Fatima apparitions, and he was the one when Hemingway was at the post, getting cared for after he was almost killed, who anointed him and gave him, according to the foremost scholar of Hemingway's Catholicism, would have given him the viaticum, the extreme unction, and he did give him the extreme unction because Hemingway refers to that in his letter to his friend a couple of years later. Extreme unction, extreme unction. Thank you. I'm saying munction. Thank you. And so from that point forward, Hemingway considered himself a Catholic. Now this priest, Don Giuseppe Bianchi, ministered to him, and Charles Scribner is the one who told me that when I began this long journey in September 2011, just a couple months after Gary Cooper, the 50th anniversary of his death. Charles Scribner, when I was looking for an angle, said from that point forward, Hemingway considered himself a Catholic.
Well, which Scribner was this? Was that one of his publishers?
Charles Scribner III. He's the Zion of the Scribner Publishing family.
Was he the one who was with Kennedy, who was a contemporary of Hemingway?
He was the last of the Scribners ever seeing the publishing house before it was, as it was sold to Macmillan, and now it's Simon and Schuster. So his father was the, his father
knew Hemingway.
Oh yeah, I mean,
How did he know
Charlie knew Hemingway.
How did he know Hemingway?
Well, they were his father, the original the Scribner. Well, the one that published Hemingway first was his grandfather.
Yeah.
So it was they're all Charles. So it's not hard to remember what their names are. Charles Scribner.
Just to drive that point, why was he so convinced that Hemingway was a Catholic?
Because Hemingway was his closest friend was his grandfather, Charles Scribner. And then they reset. It was Charles.
Did he tell his grandson that Hemingway was a Catholic? Okay. Well, here's something here. The apparitions, which I did when you're in school, when you're a kid in school, these do have a power over you. I mean, power with you. Hemingway was a strong Catholic. His religion came mainly from the apparitions of the Virgin Mary. He told me several times, if there was no Bible, was no man-made church laws, the apparitions proved beyond any doubt that the Catholic Church was the true church. They really did convince him.
When did he have?
Well, I think.
What were you asking?
When did he have the apparitions?
No, that he heard about them.
No,
heard that.
he would have heard about them from Don Giuseppe Bianchi, who's like a double, as I say, for the priest in the farewell to arms, which was 1918. So the Fatima apparitions occurred in 1917 over several months. So here's the deal.
They were in Portugal, right?
Yes.
They were in Portugal, but here's the deal that you have to understand with Hemingway is when he was lying bleeding on the battlefield, he prayed. He wrote to his father-in-law Thomas Welsh, and he said, "I prayed with almost tribal faith." You know, he comes from the Indians in Michigan, and that whole experience. I prayed with almost tribal faith to Mary and all the saints. I mean, he was much worse off than is generally understood or reported. So he almost died. So from that point forward, I think he understood that there was like this bond with Mary that she saved his life.
That's very Latin. That's very Italian. No, it is.
Mm-hmm.
This tribute, special tribute to Mary, right?
Well, it's just the reality in his life, I think, and it's traced all throughout his life. It's in the Old Man and the Sea. Well, like for instance, when he's fishing in summer of '33, you know, he's doing the same exact thing he promises. You know, he wants to catch this marlin, and he doesn't know if he's going to. So he promises he'll pray 100 Our Fathers and 100 Hail Marys and give $5 to the church.
So he knew how he could insinuate himself into characters as a Catholic. He could imagine what they would do with prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this one, Nick Adams, who was his character,
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of the earlier books. On those nights, I was cold awake, and I said my prayers over and over, and tried to pray for all the people I had ever known. If you prayed for all of them, saying a Hail Mary and an Our Father for each one, it took a long time, and finally it would be light in the morning, and then you could go to sleep. If you were in a place where you could sleep in the daylight. This is so Hemingway. That extra sentence, which you think is like in the movie Paris at Midnight. You think the sentence is over, and then he goes on to give you some clarification. If you were in a place where you could sleep in the daylight. That's Hemingway. But there's an account where he insinuated, in one of his main character, Nick Adams. So how did he get this information on how Catholics pray? On their belief in the Blessed Mother. How did he get all that information? Because he was raised with a Congregationalist or something. And that's kind of a Calvinist thing, the New England Calvinist.
Well, Midwest. Yeah,
Well, it came from New England, I guess.
Yeah,
Anyway,
right, Boston.
but well, how would he get from Calvinism to the Blessed Mother?
Well, I think if you now, of course, Charles Scribner tells me that when you're hi, Father Gary.
Hi, Father Gary, welcome.
When
You missed the best part. I was questioning her true commitment to this story, which is apparently real. So we're getting there.
Okay.
It's about the belief, Hemingway's belief in the apparitions of Mary. Of course, Fatima being a major one is nearby in Portugal, and in close proximity to where he was in southern Europe, and being in the company of Italians, and the priests are very much into that appreciation or devotion to Mary, it made all sense that he would be surrounded by this goodwill towards Mary. And I'm just trying to figure out how you, in an anthropological way, trying to figure out how he came to understand Catholicism. Because his characters, Nick Adams, for example, who was himself, playing himself, did seem to understand how Catholics, it sounds like me praying, it's me. It's many of us. Hail Mary, and Our Father. And he would do it over and over again, in this case, to get to sleep.
Yeah, because because he was of the wounding, he thought if in the dark, he was afraid he was going to relive that dying. His soul was going to leave his body. The same thing that he experienced, because he felt like it was like a soul napkin coming out of his pocket. He was like almost dead, coming back to life. So that darkness always scared him.
Now, the thing I mentioned earlier was these titles are great, like Done and For Whom the Bell Tolls, obviously from a poem. And Ecclesiastes was a real reach, because I always thought one of the geniuses of Hemingway was the ability to find really arresting titles.
Yeah.
I mean, these are not casual titles. For Whom the Bell Tolls was great, because that was a war of a great moral ambiguity as far as I'm concerned. It wasn't the loyalists were not the pure good guys by any means. They were communists. I didn't buy that, because I was raised Catholic, so I of course was rooting for the other side. But the Ecclesiastes, the sun also rises. Do you know about why he would choose that? It's about Jake Barnes, despite his impairment from the war, carrying on and walking through Montparnasse and past the sidewalk cafes and wishing everyone well from a distance, but keeping his distance, because he was never going to be part of that world. And he knew he was never going to be part of that sexual whatever world. He wasn't going to be part of it. He was withdrawn from it because of an accident that happened in the war. Wounding. And he, which in this case was different, but you have this guy, a friend of mine, Gary Ross, a film director, told me that everything in Hemingway was between the lines. If you want to understand, you have to understand the backstory. It wasn't that Jake Barnes is walking along Montparnasse, going home that night. It's that he is totally separated from the world, and he's not going to be part of the world. And you have to understand that's what it's about, being deeply alone. And that's what you can read. If you read it like that, you say, my God, he's alone, this guy. And he's waving at people, but he's not really saying hello to them. He's at a distance from everybody. Who is this guy? And how's he going to survive to the next day? And how's Hemingway understand the sun also rises? Because the sun will rise. If you go back and read it from the Old Testament, it's about the sun will rise again. And life will go on, with or without you. And with or without your travails, it's going to go on, with or without you. Got it? And then that's the real loneliness, because you realize you're only a very small part of it. And that's Hemingway.
I know. Yeah, the day before my dad died, that was the last thing I read to him. It was very poignant. I just interviewed Patrick Hemingway. Well, it's the well, he got the title. He would get together with Dos Passos, and they would share. Hemingway learned to write by reading the Old Testament. He really loved the Old Testament, so that's when he was in high school. So that's
why he's a real Protestant.
Yeah. So that's not that's
Anyway.
yeah, that's part of it. So that but and then Dos Passos made this interesting comment that anybody who could master Cableese and the Old Testament was going to be the next great writer. But so they would share, and so that concept in The Sun Also Rises is the idea of the life what you described
It
is
goes on.
The life in Pamplona that he was depicting, it was the sort of like meaninglessness going, and so anyway, I need to read that in order to get down to it.
Is bar hopping. The bar hopping of the people enough money to spend on booze, and all they did went from bar to bar to bar along Montparnasse, and that's all they did. And then they went to the bullfight. They were drunk there, and
but embedded in that is the deep spirituality. I mean, the Sun Also Rises has a ton of spiritual references. But
let's talk about bullfighting.
Okay.
Because I wrote a piece after Kathy, my wife Kathleen's here, we went to a bullfight in Barcelona, and I wrote a piece trashing bullfighting. I said, the ball goes down, finally, then they put this thing, you open up apples with in the ear of the poor steer or whatever it is. And I kept thinking, this is awful, this isn't a combat, this isn't even competition, this is ridiculous. And the crazy clowns, the distracting, and the whole picador thing, it's all horrible. But Hemingway loved it. I've got the book at home. First thing I read by Hemingway was Death in the Afternoon. And it's so well written, it's great. But he begins it by saying, from a Christian point of view, the whole bullfight is indefensible. That's what struck me in terms of your book. You used Christianity as kind of like something to be dismissed. In a Christian point of view, it's indefensible. What do you think of that?
Well, that was his opinion. I think a lot of Spaniards would disagree.
Yeah, right.
I haven't really drilled down to that his understanding of bullfighting and being indefensible from a Christian point of view. But what I do think is that Ralph, when he was very exciting to know when he early on that bullfighting, any kind of sport, writing, he could earn actual grace, and that gets back to your original question. That's one of, I think, the big discoveries, the essence of Hemingway. You boil it down, that he understood, because he constantly would say, I'm trying to be a good person, or trying to be a good writer, but it's harder to be a good writer. And he understood that his work, and he was a very disciplined worker, that he was earning actual grace. It's prevenient grace, it's precedes conversion, but it's a kind of grace. It's so that's, I think if we boil Hemingway down to his essence, that's one of my main
that's so great.
Revelations.
Well, that's great because he said, laborare esterare. To work is to pray.
Yes.
And you think that his commitment that on a day when you can't write was a lost day.
And the thing is, when he couldn't write, it was also, for him, it was very healing. And when he couldn't write, for instance, at the end of his life, when they did the electroshock, it was just, it was.
Why do you think he killed himself?
Well, I think he was terribly mentally ill. And God, the church judges, but he was, Orson Welles said that, he's not to be judged. He's not the Hemingway that I knew. He was, if you watch, documentaries, you see what he looked like. He was just ill. So, but the electroshock therapy had taken away his ability, his memory, and that was the tool of his writing.
That's what he said. He said, for a writer, memory is everything. You have to draw on your experience.
And for him, writing was like breathing, so he couldn't breathe anymore. And so I think he just went. He was already ill, and he just gave up. And I think.
But it was premeditated. He used to put the shotgun in his mouth.
Oh well, I know. His father killed himself. He was always fixated on the idea that he would end his life the same way from the time his father died. So I think that was just kind of in the back of his. It
seems very young to me. I'm old. I'm 79, and I think 61 is pretty early.
He looked older than you do.
That's a compliment.
Is that funny?
I meant that as a compliment. I meant that as I didn't come out the right way. I don't think that.
Well, there's some of this stuff I thought.
He looked like he was an old man.
Premature.
Yes.
You talk about some things that I think are facile. They're not what's the right word? Accidental. Studied at school. Accidental, as opposed to essential. You talk about the fact that he observed fish on Friday. Back when that was the thing. When that was a church precept about visiting cathedrals. Well, everybody wants to visit a cathedral when you go to Europe. That's what you go for. Is Europe. You go to see cathedrals.
Oh, but he visited the cathedral after he was. I don't mean to interrupt you.
Not everybody.
No, Christians want to visit cathedrals.
Everybody.
Really?
Much more so, I think. Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you, but after that horrible plane crash, he could barely walk. He takes himself to the cathedral in Burgos and haltingly walks up the stairs. he visited Santiago de Compostela frequently. No, that was the
Did you take the walk?
pilgrimage.
Yeah, you did.
I haven't done that yet.
I think we're gonna do that.
Oh, lovely.
Connie did.
Oh, lovely.
Or
Lovely.
goes to Santiago.
But that was
Let's talk about
pilgrimage.
this other. He prayed, I'm a student of Jack Kennedy, written a lot of books, and I tried to figure him out, Kennedy, and his religion. His religion was particular. He, certainly in terms of his family, it was real. He would go to Kick's grade, and in England he would go to his son who died at birth, Patrick, and he would kneel, and it was very devotional, and he would do the same for his brother. He would stop and light a candle when he went past the church for his older brother his older brother Joe. It was real. So when it came to the Kennedys, if you combined family with God, it was real. And Hemingway, you talk about praying for his friends at night, and that kind of devotional reality. It's powerful stuff.
No, Colonel Lanham, and they had a great relationship. And he said he alternated between being nothing and being a half-assed Catholic. And then when they were in Spain, I think it was the Malaga thing where they had sort of a run-in, and he said, by George, my God, he prayed. He would go to and he said he could see. He didn't wear his religion on his sleeve. I think, I don't know.
Would he admit it now?
Would Hemingway admit it now?
Would he admit if you're in this room and he was Catholic?
Well, since he's in the afterlife now.
No. I'm saying if he were in this room, would he admit he was Catholic and had given his life experience?
Well, when he was he was still alive, he didn't because he didn't think he was a good example as a Catholic. So so I think that was part of why he.
Well, let's talk about those marriages, because if you go back and you just read Movable Feast, which is a delight to read.
Yes.
If you read that, you get a sense that there's a longing there for Hadley. And even though he'd been by then through 3 subsequent marriages, that he had a belief that he was wrong in leaving her for
Pauline Pfeiffer.
who was a pilot fish or whatever you call it.
Yeah, well,
that's even in the book down the latest edition, which is that these are all just treasure hunters. They go after the famous writer, but Hadley was the real thing. And explain that and his longing for the first wife.
Well, first of all, let me say that when you say the real edition, that's the edition that was it's based on works that were pieces that were excised. Charles Scribner would say that the real edition is the 1964 edition. So there's that's
So that was the one done with his kids.
It was Patrick and Sean. They took materials
Was
that were
to
excised.
to save their mother?
I think that it gave I think that might have been part of it, but his secretary, who was the wife and then the mother of Sean, she verified that was what was in that first edition was what Hemingway wanted. Yeah. So she told Charles Scribner that. So Valerie Hemingway. So that's the first thing, and the question was, in terms of his love of Hadley. Well, sure. I mean, I think he was romanticizing it because the marriage did have issues. So I think you have to, and it's all
What's that mean?
The marriage had obstacles. I mean, there were, for instance, she I think saw herself as a very important part of his writing, which she was, but then when that was superseded by like Gertrude Stein, and then she was sort of sidelined, you can make a case, and I've sort of made the case, that all the writings that were lost, kind of accidentally on purpose.
They lost them on the train.
And then she got pregnant, and with a more important procreationist kind of, which of course is true, but what happened is for Hemingway, his writing was paramount. So that was not a good move. Now she could have just lost it accidentally, but it is a curious thing because all his friends, Michael Strader and the other, they really sympathized with him. It was a real blow for him. So
what did he lose?
Well, it was actually a blessing in the way because he lost the war novel. the war novel that he was writing, but actually he was, and it was funny because after, it was interesting rather, because after that skylight fell on him, which I think was, Scott Fitzgerald was drunk one night, he was losing something. And so then after that, and when the pain, it was 10 years after the war injury, and then he was able to, with the painkillers, he was able to really focus on relive the wounding. And that's when he was able to really come into writing the Farewell to Arms. It was the first novel, the first kind of go at, and the grocery store I read it said it needed more concentrating. It wasn't a sharp.
It's kind of the easiest to read.
Well, he lost it though. That was, he lost it, and then he
Oh.
redid the show. But the Hadley relationship, I mean, they drank like fishes. I don't think that,
That's new. That's not in Movable Feast.
Right, they drank like fishes, and they would throw, and that's in her autobiography.
Did you read The Paris Wife?
Yes, and I think that's very harsh on Hemingway. I try and give a more balance to you because they make Hemingway out to be this horrible guy, and actually, Desposito says that it's true he was hard on women, but he was of the belief that the women came out better. Now, so that was, I mean, so he was hard, but it wasn't, now, so the marriage, whatever you think, and also, the big thing is, she was very anti-Catholic. She didn't want John to be baptized Catholic, and she said, and so that was an obstacle. You know, she should have helped Hemingway, because he was medicating his wounds, and I'm sorry, if, you know, she was an enabler, because he had a drinking problem. He
Early on.
oh yeah, he had a drinking problem from the war. From the time of the war, he was boozing because he was medicating. He was self-medicating. So I mean, I don't want to be judged. I don't want to be too harsh. But if she had been a really good wife, she would have said, "Excuse me, honey, I think we're gonna have vichy water tonight. We're gonna kind of, because they drink at lunch and they'd drink at dinner. I mean, a lot, and then cordials, and they'd throw up, and that's
They
not.
threw up?
Oh yeah, they do. They'd be drinking up.
Where did you find that?
That's Hadley's book.
Oh, really?
That's Hadley's book. So I don't think that was helpful. And then also when he started, you know, he was romancing the woman who's based in, Lady Brett Ashley. Lady Brett Ashley in the book, and she's Duff Twisden. So he was, you know, cozying up to her, and a good wife would have said, "Excuse me, honey, we're going home for dinner tonight. Hi, it's nice seeing you, Duff Twisden. See you later." But because she was
So
a very
funny,
loose woman.
He made them out to be worthless characters, and yet they were his characters. They were his people.
Oh yeah, they were his peeps. Well, they were fun. They were interesting, but it was after the war. It was an interesting time of great. Well, Scott Fitzgerald wrote about it in This Side of Paradise. You know. I mean, they were a lost generation.
Yeah, I think a couple things. Hemingway was great at, as you said, at discipline. He was so self-disciplined.
Got it from his parents.
And he had rules of cutting off the superfluous beginnings of articles or books.
Mm-hmm.
To get rid of the superfluous, the build up, the preparation, just get to the heart of it. And it's very difficult thing to do. He also said, always quit while you're ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Always leave something to write the next morning. Don't finish up the idea. Save the idea for the next day, because you'll need it to get started. That's how you get back on track. So he was very helpful to writers. He, as I said, there was so much about him that was disciplined. He used to talk about when an old friend called up and said, "I want to come see you," he'd say, "Meet me at S&M at this bar," because he knew that if he met the guy at a bar, he could leave, which is it's like Barack Obama, "Meet me at the Jefferson Hotel because I can leave." It was just like him. And he didn't like meeting people either. But it was like Hemingway had tricks to get away from people. He said the hardest thing about writing is people, because they keep barging into you and trying to get something done. And but he was so good at this. And he used to talk about the worthless types. He talked about the people that hung around the rotund and the dome on Montparnasse, and he said that they anticipated the columnist for the daily pretense of immortality, which is a great knock on columnists, because if you write a column every day, you will be immortal that day, but not necessarily a day later. And he understood how immortality would be imagined by the columnist or the person who hung around the cafes of Montparnasse. He really was tough on lazy people.
Oh, and
As you said,
Scott.
he saw work and work as a writer as actual grace.
Oh, actual grace.
Well, I want to give you a chance before this public assembled here has a chance to take a crack at you, to give your best case when you go through this book, which is your Bible. You've got it in here. What would you say to read the most important pages that makes your case that he was an undeclared Catholic?
Well, I don't think he was really undeclared. What they always say that he was a convert because he needed to become Catholic to get his marriage annulled, but he was Catholic before that.
Which marriage annulled? Hadley?
Hadley. That was annulled. I think if you the best case, if you read Old Man and the Sea, if you read The Radio, the Nun and the Gambler, the short story that he wrote after he big car accident there in Billings, Montana. So if you, it's embedded in his writing, and read I think also just his own letters, what he wrote to the Thomas Wells, saying that he prayed with almost tribal faith to when he was bleeding profusely on the battlefield to Mary and all the saints. If you just read what he wrote, you read his letters, you read my book, you'll see that he was really, he had a quiet faith. He was much more deeply spiritual, and just by his friendship. So friendship with Gary Cooper, who, as Gary Cooper was dying, he wanted A. Hutcher to let Hemingway know that becoming a Catholic was the best thing he had ever done, because he knew that how terribly ill Hemingway was, and he wanted to sort of give him a more fortification, a moral kind of buttress him morally. So by his friendships, I think he was friends with the great Florentine scholar, and his name's going to escape me, of course, the Berenson. Berenson. So that he was his A Farewell to Arms. I think if you read The Farewell to Arms, I think that is Hemingway, even though Charles Scribner tells me it's like Evan Longwell, that is not I, is not me, whatever. I'm not, but it really was, and he was just like F. Scott Fitzgerald, basically writing about himself, and so many of his works. So
his fear of some people, Tommy Valley, a friend of ours who's doing so much great work in Vietnam, he says that all the great Hemingway novels are war novels.
Oh, yeah.
And they all come out of the World War I experience. Did you ever watch Adventures of a Young Man?
Yeah.
It's you can get on Turner Classic Movies. You can not Turner Classic, just regular. It's a series of books pulled together like Nick Adams into one big story.
Oh.
It's pretty good.
Oh. I think I've heard that's good. That sounds excellent.
And then while we go, my wife is raising her hand.
Okay.
Mary Claire, it's up to you now.
Okay.
So I'm gonna ask you the question
Yes.
that you say you usually get asked first.
Yes.
Which is, why did you want to write a book about Hemingway and his faith?
Okay, that's the one I'm easily conversant on. Or most easily conversant. So, well, I was writing about Gary Cooper. I actually started writing biographies, but Gary Cooper, and finally, got his piece published on the 50th anniversary of his death. I thought the LA Magazine would want to, talk because I think his conversion, it was not just, but it was just so fascinating. But they were interested in his external life. So, got that piece published, and May 13th, 2011, and a few weeks, six weeks later, the news of Hemingway's death, 50th anniversary of his death. I thought, that's so interesting. I'd never focused on Hemingway. So I started reading, just at that point, it was like very calming for me to read The Sun Also Rises, and then talked to Charlie Scribner and found out he was considered himself a Catholic. I thought, really? Nobody knows that. So it kind of flowed from that, and then it was that connection between Gary Cooper and Ernest Hemingway, and they were quite close. And of course, Marie Cooper Janis wrote the foreword. Beautiful. They had a beautiful friendship. It's interesting because F. Scott and Hemingway were so close, but F. Scott was, he had his issues, and then when he died, right,
Those issues.
right, but just before he died, he met Gary Cooper, and it's a very interesting. I want to write about the trio actually next. It's a very interesting
Cooper did,
dynamic.
wrote the Bell Tolls, and he did
Yeah.
the original,
A Farewell to Arms. Yes, when Hemingway wrote A Farewell to, for him, The Bell Tolls, he wrote it with Gary Cooper as Robert Conrad. Is it Robert? Is that, did I get his name right? The protagonist,
Yeah.
Robert.
Questions? Yes, sir.
There was a mention of Berenson. I'm assuming it's Bernard Berenson?
Bernard Berenson.
But he was
yes.
Jewish, not Catholic.
Well, he really, I think he was Catholic. Yeah, I think.
Maybe he converted.
I think he was a.
That's what I'm wondering.
I think
He
he was
may
a
have
Catholic
converted.
convert. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he's Jewish.
Yeah.
At least by birth, anyway.
Yeah.
But he's Catholic, I don't know.
Yeah. Because Hemingway was always telling. I think he was a Catholic convert.
Okay.
I do believe, and Hemingway was very.
If you had AI right now, you could find the answer.
Well, I know a little bit about this because the Private Librarian, which I just read, which is about J.P. Morgan's private librarian, who was African American but lived as a white, had a major affair with Bernard Berenson throughout her life. And she describes him, and it's a historic novel, as Jewish. He was from Russia, but he always hid his Judaism. He never was public about it because there was so much anti-Semitism at the time, as she hid her race.
That's interesting.
That is very interesting. Wow.
And you talked about his suicide, that his father committed suicide.
Yeah.
I understand both his grandfather, his brother, his sister, his granddaughter all committed suicide.
His grandfather?
That's what I understand. Is that true?
I'm not sure
Plus he
his
was obviously
grandfather.
was very sick physically, but mentally I could see.
Yeah, I mean, there was a
about
lot of
his hereditary.
suicide. I'm not sure about his grandfather, but there was a lot of. Well, they had genetic hemochromatosis.
Right.
So
What does that mean?
that means
Hunter
it's-
S. Thompson also committed suicide at the same time in his life, but wasn't related to him, but modeled his life off.
Yeah.
So
Well-
maybe it was just his personality.
No, but he definitely had the genetic predisposition and also the hard living.
Yeah.
So, but there were a lot of
The chromatosis.
the hemochromatosis is
Extra iron.
most people who commit suicide, maybe Hunter S. Thompson, have too much iron in the blood. It's just, I don't know, it causes depression. And actually they could have if they had just let the blood, and that was actually the last thing I was interviewing Patrick because I wanted to know, of course, Patrick didn't want to question the doctors. Of course, that's what I did on a regular basis when I was taking care of my dad. But Lester, his brother, who I think committed suicide, definitely said that because his dad had hemochromatosis. So just that buildup of iron, for some reason, your body doesn't absorb it.
How does it work? How do you feel the urge genetically to commit suicide?
I don't know. You'll have to interview him when we get to have
It seems like a very specific.
Probably, yeah, extra.
Depression plus the physical pain he had. He was, his vertebrae. I mean, he was just a beat man physically.
Yeah.
So
All his
he was just racked with pain, and plus,
his brain, all the traumatic brain injury, and then just the pain that all his life he wore this rubber thing around his knee. He had that his whole life. So he had, and when the airplane crashes, I think that was the turning point where you read the book, you just see all the stuff that happened to him. The vertebrae crushing.
He wanted to write a letter to John Kennedy congratulating him when Kennedy won. He couldn't write it.
Oh, he couldn't. Yeah, because they had given him the electric shock therapy, which absolutely just.
Maybe I read it in your book.
The other question I want to follow up though, in terms of his faith, you said, he was obviously committed to be Catholic. He was converted basically.
Yeah.
But in terms of his living the Catholic faith,
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about his drunken episodes and so forth, and also the one, if you can verify that he attended the firing squads that Castro and Che had when they took over Cuba, and it was almost like sport with him and George Plimpton.
Yeah, I heard that. I don't know about
They
that
went to
recording. Yeah.
They went to the firing
The firing
As if
squads
they were going
of
to
Batista.
sport.
Yeah.
He went
As
to
if
those?
it was sort of his
Apparently
Maximus.
went to them as well as Plimpton, and
Yeah.
they had
600 people.
had, you know,
Castro, yeah.
tequilas to sell, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't, it says it was Circus Maximus and it was Rome.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, somebody
Okay.
else, I
Clinton
don't
did that
know.
too?
Plimpton, yeah.
That's
Plimpton
the
wrote about it in the
recording.
Paris Review.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, you have to get more than one source.
A little bit caught up in celebrity.
Well, I just don't know what the truth of the
Well,
matter is.
yeah, I'm just talking about the way he lived his life. in
Okay,
terms
so
of
the marriages, okay, so the first one was annulled, the second one, Pauline, she couldn't have more children, so that,
She was very Catholic, right?
yeah,
Even though she married a guy who'd been married.
yeah, she was raised very, her mother was very devout, and Pauline was a devout Catholic, but, I mean, she did get involved with a married man with a child, so that was a little bit irregular, but, anyway, but they were very good for each other, but she couldn't have more children, so then Hemingway, you know, he had to think about that one because she was her birth control, you know, was her belief that was wrong, so that put a crimp in the marriage, and also there were other issues in that marriage, as I write about. So, and then Martha Gellhorn came in, and now the Gellhorn marriage, that marriage was not valid, and that it didn't last as Pauline predicted. And then after Pauline died, he could have had his fourth marriage with Mary totally squared away. I mean, he was of the generation where you married your affairs. That, like Larry King used to say that. So he was more Victorian.
Larry King said what?
He married his affairs.
That's very Sinatra too.
Yeah.
They
So-
always got married.
So that.
Elizabeth Taylor,
Yeah.
Yeah. whatever.
So it can all be squared away. I mean, so he's just a weak person, but I think that the idea of him as a big drunk and all these flaws, it misses the real person that he was, and that's what my book is trying to bring out, because he is, you know, he had flaws. I mean, that's a lot of great people, a lot of great artists. It's because they're great artists because they are so flawed, and from that flows their art. But no, I think he's been maligned, and I have some great interviews with Patrick Hemingway talking, because they say that, you know, Martha Gellhorn was the only one that stood up to him, and she was the great writer. Well, she wasn't. I mean, as Patrick said, Omar Bradley. I mean, they didn't read on the 15th anniversary of D-Day her works. They read Hemingway's works. You know, so there's a lot of misreporting on Hemingway. Yeah, he was flawed, but he was the essence, and the essence of Hemingway, which H.R. Steinbeck said, was sanctity, and the essence of sanctity is to struggle. So he struggled, and he was just he wasn't puffed up, pompous sort. No, I think read my book, you'll see another side.
So that's what we're gonna do, read the book. I read myself. Any thoughts, anybody wanna add something? I think it's been a great group. In the back, sir.
Thank you, very clear. Is there something that's not in the book that you've thought about since publishing it that you think might help reveal a little bit more about Hemingway? Or is there something that you'd like to share with us?
Well,
that might help us
I'm
understand?
gonna put it in the next edition, but there is one quote that I did run across, which is great. That this guy George Herder said that Hemingway believed that that God and Jesus believed that Mary was the listening post for God and Jesus. I think that's a great image.
Yeah. And who said that about him?
George Herder, his friend who was a friend from the 20s. He was I don't know, he's just a social friend.
Yeah.
He wrote this great cookbook, Bull Cook something, some popular cookbook, George Herder. So I think that's just lovely.
Why do you think people are so fixated on him? You know, he does have. Chris talked about how he, you know, is obsessed with him and follows and goes to pilgrimages basically to where he's lived, and I've been on those pilgrimages. But why do you think, for someone who's written 5 books?
Oh, but a ton of short stories.
Yeah, but why he looms so large?
Well, I mean, you read the descriptions, and he was like a real star. He just was. It's almost like Gary Cooper. I remember visiting A.C. Lyle's office, and
A.C. Lyle?
he was a good friend of mine.
I know him.
I wanted to talk to you about him. And so, and he showed me, he had all the pictures of all the stars with him and every star. And then all of a sudden you get to Gary Cooper. I was like, he was like the most gorgeous of all. And Hemingway just was a star. He was outsized personality, and he knew how to promote himself. And I mean, he had something special, and it just continues to this day. And of course, his writing was something special. And he pioneered a new. It's the more the taut, vivid. Writing. His was a unique style. As Dos Passos said, it was somebody who can combine Cableese and the Old Testament has got something unique.
Yes.
So my question, fortunately, is not involved in suicide, but Truman Capote and Peter Benchley and others disliked Hollywood. They would often think that Hollywood would skew their novels and their stories. What was his relationship with Hollywood?
Oh, it's the same. He said, there's a great quote, I think it's in the book that I don't know if it's in this book, but you go to the Nevada line, you stick your arm out, you grab the money, and then you run as fast as you can. That was his relationship. Yeah, you read when Howard Hawks came around to try and get him to work on films, and he said, I don't want to go out to Hollywood. I got to stick to my writing. And he said, no, I'll come. We'll come fish and hunt. And yes, no, he didn't like Hollywood. But he's hung out with all the stars of the crowd, Marlene Dietrich and Ingrid Bergman, and anyway.
Peter Benchley, who was fired by Joe Califano at the White House and went on to write Jaws. A great story. Anyway, I want to thank you for this.
Well, thank you.
I'll tell you something, because it was kind of a counter-reformations of discussion here. And a little zig to it. And I really wanted to push you on it, and I'm glad I did.
I'm glad you did too.
And I want to say this, that Jack Kennedy was sometimes deeper than we thought he was about everything. Once said that the reason people read biography or read history is to answer the simple question, what was he like? Thank you for answering the question.
Oh, thank you, Chris.
Anyway, what was he like?
Thank you. If the Metropolitan wants to do that. Well, thank you.
These people are so literate.
Now I'm gonna have a Well, thank you so much. So we're going to send the video to John Sanders. He was supposed to be here tonight. So we'll he does
Sarah, my daughter-in-law,
yeah. Okay, so you're a okay.
So this is the land. I'll tell him that you would be. Yeah.